So good to see all of you here. We have such an interesting story to tell, we think. And speaking of history, there's so much history up here at this table. It's unbelievable. Before we get to the real serious part of the evening, can you hear me? Let's talk sports, as we all have been all evening. In looking up things to bring tonight, guess what I found? The Spartans as Big Ten champs on a t-shirt from 1990. This is one of the things the Journal did on a fairly regular basis, promotional item. A photo by Dave Olds, who was with us at the table here. And I thought, how timely. So I had to bring it. So when we talk about the State Journal, we talk about a changing newspaper, and it is changing, and it is continuing to evolve. And I think that's one of our topics here tonight. It's really a key topic. And one part of that is the name of the newspaper. If you were listening closely to what Karen was saying, the name of the newspaper changed regularly. Different eras, different name. We have been at different points, the State Journal, at different points, the Lansing State Journal. Well, one day we had kind of a surprise for all of us. The paper came out. We all read the paper for errors. We were all trying to be so careful. And when we looked carefully at the newspaper, the name of it was the Journal State. Now, the newspaper used to come out at midday, and part of our job was to check it for errors. But the name of the newspaper was standard. It never changed. We thought it never changed. And so hardly anybody actually read it because everybody knew already what it said. So here we are, and I, among them myself, in the whole newsroom, we all look at the paper and looking for little typos and all this stuff. And finally, we get a call from one of the carriers out in the circulation area, and he says, "Say, did you change the name of the newspaper?" And we said, "Well, no, why?" And he said, "Well, look at it." And we were just absolutely floored that that had gotten out, and it did get out. The explanation was we used to have metal type, and in the composing room they were moving parts of type around, and it got replaced in the wrong order. So we have, that's like a key item in this, which is the famous blooper book. The blooper book is a collection of typographical errors. You're welcome to come up and look at it.
I'm sure I made some.
Little boo-boos over time. But when somebody says, and people have, what's the best item in here? I still think it's this. It has to be that. But anyway, my name is Marcia Van Ness. I came to the Journal in 1966 as the reporter, K-12 schools, education. Eventually moved and added community colleges, MSU. Had the great good fortune over time to move into some of the most fascinating jobs ever in editing the feature section, editing the Metro section, and finally assistant editor of the editorial pages. So I regard my experience as a treasure, and I think that I have the broadest view of what all happened over time and how things changed, and believe me, they did change. They're still changing. A couple weeks ago, a month ago or so, we saw in the newspaper we're adding some things. USA Today pages, more local coverage. That spawned some columns about that, opinion columns about how that's going to work. But as we've seen over time, this is what a good newspaper really does. Among other things, when we talk about the name and different names and stuff, for a starting point with the Journal, you have to remember that one of the issues always surrounding the Journal has been its identity, actually. Is this a capital city daily focusing on state government, or is this a Lansing newspaper for the Lansing community? And we like to think both, but there have been endless debates on that subject. How much involvement do the people of Lansing have with state government? Now we have a huge state government readership and a huge university readership. But some people in Lansing have no real personal connection with either one. So what we're trying to do is put out a newspaper of interest to the entire community. And all of that effort evolved during my years here and some of our years here as well, and we may hear more about that. But we began to see transitions when I first came in content. The newspaper for years, and some of you who remember years back, I think will attest to this. The newspaper on a fairly regular basis had the same names of the same people doing the same things year after year after year. And finally, somebody in the news ranks, the company ranks, said, you know, we've got to expand our reach here. We need to be reflecting the entire community. And it began an outreach effort, and it was taken very seriously. And we developed a source list. I got so much stuff up here. Oh, how to call people who aren't usually in the newspaper to get them in the newspaper quoted in various ways and with various stories. And along that time came the idea that if we're going to do a good job there, we need to have a staff that reflects the entire community. And we need to have people in roles that are a little more flexible than they had been in the past. For many, 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 many years, the local news reporting staffs were mostly men. The feature story staff were mostly women. The sports staff was all men. And the photography staff was primarily men. Now, before my time, we had pioneers. We had Ginger Sharp, a photographer, who became one of the first women in the state, as I recall, to become a full-time news photographer, and she was with the State Journal. For years, Thelma Harnett was our religion writer. She was the first person you saw when you walked in the newsroom. She greeted everyone. She was every place doing everything for everybody. But in terms of the local news reporting staff, politics, government, education, there were very few women. And so I came and it was like, whoa, you're going to be doing what? Okay, all right. In features, somebody said, you know, we really need to expand our horizon. This photo was down on the table. Our key writer in features, in those days it was called a society section by whatever name, was Virginia Redfern, who is legendary to this day. If you spent any time in Lansing, this is Virginia. She was legendary, truly. When I came to Lansing, I had some relatives here, and they said, what are you going to be doing here? And I told them, and they said, oh, are you going to be a Virginia Redfern? And I said, maybe. And everybody knew who she was. The column at that time in the women's department, features section, society area, focused on really the elite families in town, the prominent families in town, life at the country club and that kind of thing, which is fine. But the idea then, as we evolved, was, okay, let's expand beyond that. Let's see who else we can get in our people columns, in our feature section columns. And why don't we have a man feature writer, for one thing? And so we hired Mark Sauer, really talented young feature writer, who was a blast to work with, seemed to enjoy the role. He's moved on years ago. Sue Brzezinski was in features for a while, went on to become managing editor of the Detroit News. Trudy Westfall went into public information and public relations in the Saginaw area. And there's me, and people always, were you ever that young? And I don't know. I don't know. I'm starting to wonder myself. But all those changes started, and hopefully to improve the product. It became more of a community project. In fact, we used to have a section called Community, as a matter of fact. I think Ute remember that. Remember that? In an effort to do this. We broadened the staff. Being one of the first women in hard news reporting was really an interesting experience. Part of my assignment for a while was at the state capitol. And they had seen very few women, some, but not very many. And I noticed in the news conferences, you'd gather to hear the news conference, and whoever was speaking would stand up and say, greet everyone. He'd say, gentlemen, and start speaking. And here I'd be sitting right there, and there were two of us, Jackie Corona with AP and Carol Eberly with UPI, and we'd sit at various places, and finally we started, oh, gentlemen and ladies, yeah, oh, okay. Several times at the Capitol, it used to be that your news sources, if they had information sometimes at a news conference, they'd put a pile of information on the table and say, if you want more information, stop by and pick that up. And so I'd go up, and more than once, a staff member came over and said, no, 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 that's for reporters. Oh, I'm a reporter. Aren't you one of the secretaries? No. Oh, okay. At the Journal, my name is Marcia, it's spelled M-A-R-C-I-A, and I picked up the phone one day and a man said, is this Marcia Van Ness? And I said, yes, I think so. And he said, no, 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 Marcia Van Ness, the reporter. And I said, I think so. He said, really? He said, I thought you were a man of Hispanic origin. So what can I say? About that time, another study began of newspapers generally called the Page One study, and I've meaning to figure out what's happened to this because I still think about it. In newspapers generally, how many Page One stories are there about women or by women? And at the time I thought, well, that's kind of a stretch. These were researchers, some academics started that. It's called the Page One Project, but their figures were astounding. In those days, that most stories by women or about women go inside the newspaper. So I thought that was all part of changing newspapers, changing by whatever way you deliver the news. But I think that by now, I think we have, and Kathleen and everybody's going to talk more about this today, I think that our product is more diverse and more community-minded and getting more so. And I think that's a good thing, and I think it started during some of our eras. Thank you.